So please, colleagues, please take your seats as soon as possible. Insert your voting cards so we can check whether or when we achieve a quorum. So again, encouragement parties to take your seats and insert your voting cards. We need 10 more parties to achieve a quorum. And magically, we have a quorum. So thank you all for turning up so promptly. I know evening sessions aren't the most popular events, but we do need them to help us get through our work. So I have outlined a number of times the agenda, and I think the documents or the my proposed way of handling this evening has been on the daily schedule already. I indicated my intention to begin with COP19 number 1, which is a series of draft decisions on eels. This document has been prepared by the Secretariat and captures, we hope, accurately all the changes suggested by parties when we discussed agenda item 63 on eels and gwilla species. So with that, I ask you if we can adopt COP19 number 1 as the conclusion of our debate and take forward these draft decisions. So with that, I open the floor for comments. Thank you. I see the European Union. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I will be very brief. I speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. We would like to thank the Secretariat for formulating these new draft decisions and are generally positive to include other conservation aspects as proposed in 19BB and 19CC. However, we do have a question. In 19BB little b and 19DD little f, the Convention for European Eel is mentioned. We would appreciate it if the Secretariat could clarify if it refers to the Convention on Migratory Species and its action plan for Anguilla anguilla. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union. When we refer to the convention is this one, CITES. And the intention here is to improve the implementation of the convention, CITES for European eel. It's not referring to a convention on European eels or to any other convention. So with that explanation, are you content? And I see you nodding, thank you. I don't see any other requests for the floor. So on that basis, I'm going to conclude that this committee recommends the adoption of these draft decisions on eels and gwilla species. Now, to conclude this agenda item, I think we also need, and I don't think this happened in earlier debate because we clearly hadn't concluded any draft decisions. We also need to agree the deletion of decisions 18.197 to 18.202 because these are now superseded. So with that, I think we can conclude this agenda item on item 61, eels. With that, I will now move on to the next item on our agenda this evening, which is COP19 COM1 number 2, which is on rosewood timber species. The document has been prepared by the United States and includes their suggested changes to the draft decisions, and those are highlighted for you all to be able to see. So with those changes, I ask you again as a committee, are you content to adopt the draft decisions as contained in COM1 number 2? I don't see any requests from the floor, so I'm going to see that as a sign from this committee that you are content with the amendments made to the original series of decisions in COM1 number 2, and that we can recommend their adoption to the final plenary. And I think then, having made that decision as a committee, we can then agree to the deletion of decisions 18.234 to 18.237. And on that basis, we conclude discussion of agenda item 70 on rosewood. The next item on our evening's agenda is a proposal to amend the appendices. It is proposal 45. It is to include rhodiola species in Appendix 2 with annotation #2. It is proposed by China, the European Union, Ukraine, United Kingdom, and the United States. So I would invite one of those parties to introduce the proposal on behalf of the co-proponents. And I see the European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you for the floor, Chair. On behalf of the European Union and its member states, I am glad to present to you Proposal 45 on the inclusion of the genus Rhodiola SPP in Appendix 2, proposed by China, the European Union, Ukraine, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America. Rhodiola is a genus of 58 to 90 long-lived perennial herb species widely distributed among the Northern Hemisphere, including the EU. The rhizomes of some species of rhodiola, known as roseroot, have been part of traditional medicine systems in many countries. Nowadays, they are used in a growing number of products and applications, including medicine, food supplements, cosmetics, and others. International trade is currently focused on Rhodiola rosea and Rhodiola crenulata, and industrial use has seen a rapid and ongoing rise in recent decades with regard to the diversity and the volumes of rhodiola products in trade. Estimated trade volumes are considerable and are assessed to cover at minimum several 100,000 kilograms of dried rhizomes and its equivalents annually. The vast majority of material currently traded is wild-sourced, and harvesting is focused on the exploitation of the large rhizomes of reproductively mature individuals. Commercial levels of exploitation therefore impact recruitment and long-term population viability, and significant declines in harvested populations of rhodiola species have been reported for a number of range countries where rhodiola is commercially collected. Although information on population status and trends are scarce, overexploitation has been reported to be a significant threat to Rhodiola rosea and Rhodiola crenulata, which has led to the inclusion of these species in the national red lists of all known principal source countries. Based on a biological vulnerability to harvesting, increasing levels of international trade, and declines in wild populations, Rhodiola crenulata and Rhodiola rosea meet the criteria for inclusion in Appendix 2 of CITES. Raw and semi-processed material and bulk commodities are considered to be the specimens that appear first and in large volumes in international trade, and commercial demand for these commodities pose immediate conservation concerns for the species. By suggesting annotation #2, which designates all parts and derivatives except seeds and pollen and finished products packaged and ready for retail trade, we are convinced that the proposed listing would, in line with Resolution 1121, Ref CoP18 on the use of annotations, cover those commodities that dominate international trade without generating unnecessary administrative burden to industry, consumers, and CITES authorities. Identification of specific rhodiola species can be challenging, even for live plants, but definitely for dried rhizomes. After specimens have undergone processing, it is not considered possible to identify the respective species without molecular techniques such as DNA barcoding. It has been proven that Rhodiola rosea and Rhodiola products are frequently substituted and adulterated both other rhodiola species as with other at early stages in the chain. Therefore, the look-alike provisions and criteria of the Convention are also met, and consequently, the inclusion of the whole genus Rhodiola is proposed. We therefore invite parties to support the adoption of Proposal 45 to include the genus Rhodiola SPP in Appendix 2 with annotation #2. Thank you very much.
Thank you, European Union. And with that, as always, I open the floor for comments by parties. I see Norway, followed by Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Although the species Rhodiola rosea is listed as least concern both in Norway and by the IUCN Red List in Europe, we acknowledge that specimens of the species may be difficult to distinguish from other species in the genus that may be under threat and are also in international trade. We therefore support the proposal to list the genus Rhodiola in Appendix 2 with annotation #2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Norway. I give the floor to Canada, followed by China and Ukraine.
Thank you, Chair. Canada thanks the EU and other co-proponents for preparing this proposal. Canada is a range state for two species, Rhodiola rosea and Rhodiola integrifolia. Neither species is identified as being a conservation concern in Canada. Commercial harvest and trade in wild source specimens is not known to occur, but Canada produces commercially cultivated Rhodiola rosea and exports about 10 to 15 tons each year. Given the volume of wild-sourced Rhodiola entering into trade in Eastern and Central Asia, and the conservation concerns that have been raised, Canada supports this proposal to include the two species on Appendix 2 with annotation #2 as proposed. Given that raw materials from different species are frequently substituted for each other during processing, and that it is difficult to tell which species are in the final traded product, Canada also supports the inclusion of the remaining 56 species in the genus in Appendix 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. So I'll give now the floor to two co-proponents, China, followed by Ukraine.
Thank you, China. We are pleased to have prepared this proposal with the European Union, the United States, the United Kingdom, North Ireland, and Ukraine. China is a region with the richest plant diversity in Rhodiola, and its main species are listed under national protection. Including all Rhodiola species in Appendix 2 of the Convention would help range states to enhance the conservation and sustainable use of the resources in the world and promote international cooperation. As different taxonomic literatures are used in range states, we kindly request the assistance of the Plants Committee and nomenclature specialists in combining the standard nomenclature reference. China looks forward to the parties' adoption of the proposed amendment of the Appendix 2 as well as the draft decision in CoP19 Doc 84.4. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, China, and I will come on to Doc 84.4 immediately after this proposal. I give the floor to Ukraine, followed by Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. As one of the co-proponents of this proposal, we would like to support this and thank you for author for developing this document. We are range states of one of the species, and it is a red data listed on the national red data book. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ukraine. I give the floor to Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to thank the EU and its co-proponents for the submission of this document and proposal. We are a range state of one of the species, Rhodiola rosea, which is considered to be least concern in Switzerland. but we think that the criteria for listing the whole genus is quite adequately described in the proposal, and therefore we would support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. I have no further requests from parties, but before I conclude, I will give the opportunity for any observers to comment. I see only one request, so Traffic, you have the floor.
The IUCN traffic analyses concluded that all rhodiola species meet the criteria for listing in Appendix 2, either by meeting criteria in Annex 2A or 2B of ResConf 9.24. The proposed annotation number 2 would exclude finished products packaged and ready for retail trade. Resolution 9.24 states annotations to proposals should include those specimens that first appear in international trade as export from range states. An unknown proportion of exports from some range states are in finished products, with some of those likely produced from domestic wild harvest. Therefore, Traffic recommends that the trade in finished products containing rhodiola is monitored to ensure that it does not represent a threat to the survival of the species' wild populations. Thank you.
Thank you, Traffic, for those comments. I have no further requests on the floor, so I conclude on the basis of that that this committee recommends by consensus that this proposal be adopted. So with that, I will then move on to document 84.4, which is directly linked to this proposal. And document 84.4 is entitled Standard Nomenclature for Rhodiola Species, and it has been submitted by the European Union and its member states. So you have the floor to introduce this, European Union.
Thank you, Chair. The taxonomy of the genus Rhodiola appears not entirely resolved for a few species. In some of the popular nomenclatural databases and references used in international contexts, discrepancies and ambiguities regarding the number of accepted species and the exact taxonomic placements and representations of some of the taxa could eventually lead to confusion or misinterpretation among parties in the context of implementation and enforcement of trade controls for rhodiola species under CITES. To address these issues, and with regard to requirements laid out in ResConf 1211 on standard nomenclature, a CITES standard nomenclatural reference seems to be necessary for the genus Rhodiola. Doc 84.4 outlines the nomenclatural issues in Rhodiola species, highlights a potential candidate standard nomenclature reference, and proposes draft decisions that direct the Plans Committee to consider and evaluate the nomenclatural issues and to identify and recommend a suitable standard nomenclatural reference for amendment of the annex to Resolution Conf 1211 to the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. This document has been prepared with the involvement of and in line with the recommendations made by the nomenclature specialist for plants, and we are grateful for her expertise. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, European Union. So I open the floor for comments by parties. I see the United States. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. As it relates to document CoP19, Doc 84.4 on nomenclature for rhodiola, the United States supports adoption of the draft decision 19AA as revised by the Secretariat for clarity and consistency, directing the Plants Committee to evaluate any nomenclatural issues and make recommendations on any amendments to Resolution Conf 1211 on standard nomenclature for consideration at the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. The United States, along with our co-proponents, submitted detailed comments related to the synonymy and species distributions to produce the taxon list reflected in Annex 1 of the species proposal. As such, we would not support suggestion to adopt a standard reference at the present meeting. The taxon list in Annex 1 is the best and most accurate reflection of nomenclature, and we support using Annex 1 as a basis for updating the CITES checklist of species following this meeting, should the recommendation to include this genus in Appendix 2 be adopted by the parties later this week. The United States is home to 3 rhodiola species, including 4 subspecies, one of which is federally protected under the Endangered Species Act as threatened. Therefore, we also wish to note for the record our request that the 4 subspecies of Rhodiola integrifolia, namely Rhodiola integrifolia subspecies integrifolia, subspecies leadii, subspecies neo-mexicana, and subspecies procera, also be included as separate taxon entries in the CITES checklist of species. Including the subspecies in the CITES checklist will allow us to continue to regulate and protect this subspecies from entering into commercial trade. Annex 1 of Proposal CoP19 Prop 45 includes the scientific synonyms and complete distribution data for these subspecies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. United States, a moment, make sure we've captured all that. So thank you, United States. I think we have all that. We will take a note of your request about the various subspecies, so they're captured in the record, and that action can be taken. And we note your suggestion to adopt the draft decision with the amendments as amended by the Secretariat. So okay, I see the European Union. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. It was just about making clear that the EU supports the United States on the nomenclatural consideration, and also not to adopt a final nomenclatural reference now, but only support the draft decisions as revised by the Secretariat, but not the adoption of the nomenclatural reference at this meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, European Union. So yes, we are agreed that we adopt the draft decisions. We don't adopt a standard nomenclature now, and that we capture the request relating to the 4 subspecies that the United States made. So I think with that, we can conclude this document as amended with the conclusions I just read, I just stated by consensus. I don't see any more requests from the floor, either from parties or observers. So with that, I conclude discussions on document 84.4. And we now move to proposal 52. From Switzerland, which is to amend the annotation to the listing of Orchidaceae included in Appendix 2, but I invite you, Switzerland, to introduce the proposal. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. With the proposal CoP19, Proposal 52, Switzerland would like to propose an amendment to annotation #4 with the addition of a new paragraph G to exempt finished products packaged and ready for retail trade of cosmetics containing parts and derivatives of specimens of Appendix 2 orchid species Platyla striata, Cycnochus cooperi, Gastrodialata, Phalaenopsis amabilis, and Phalaenopsis lobby from CITES regulations. Switzerland has commissioned several case studies on trade in extracts from a range of orchid species for the cosmetic industry. These studies have provided important insights and information for the analysis of this trade. The results of these case studies were presented to the Plants Committee for its information. Based on the analysis of these case studies, discussions with the relevant actors in this trade, and analysis of the CITES trade data, all 5 proposed orchid species that are used in the cosmetic industry are artificially propagated, they are grown under controlled conditions, and regarding resolution Conf 11.11 Ref CoP18 on regulation of trade in plants, all the proposed orchid species fulfill the definition of artificially propagated. The cosmetic industry has strict requirements for the registration of a new product and the requirements regarding the exclusion of risks to human health and the environment and the quality of such products must follow the same protocols as, for example, medicinal products or for food for human consumption. The compliance with these strict requirements and tests for the registration of a product containing orchid extract are only possible with standardized plants, for example, with artificially propagated plants, because with wild specimens, the ingredients vary from specimen to specimen and standardization is not possible. The species are not derived from wild collected sources for cosmetics due to the prevalence and low cost of the artificially propagated stock. Our case studies, which we have been carrying out for years now, also prove this, and the probability that there is a risk for the wild populations is extremely small. All species are easy to cultivate and are also grown on a large scale, and all trade reported is as artificially propagated. Besides that, only finished products packaged and ready for retail will be excluded, while trade of raw and semi-finished products such as extracts will remain under CITES regulation. In the discussion of our proposal and the exchange with other member states, some parties have expressed concerns that wild specimens might be introduced into the trade flows and therefore threaten the populations of these species in the wild. We take this concern seriously, and we think that it will be important to monitor the implementation and conservation impact of exempting these finished products. Therefore, we would like to submit 4 draft decisions intended to monitor the implementation of the annotation #4 exemption to assess any impact of this exemption on the 5 Appendix 2 orchid species, and to identify any conservation impacts of the annotation #4 exempting on the 5 species in the wild if the proposal is adopted by the Conference of the Parties at CoP19. At CoP18, a similar approach was taken when parties amended annotation #4 to exempt finished products of aloe ferox, packaged and ready for retail trade, was adopted with decisions to monitor the implementation of that exemption. We therefore hope you will support our proposal and the decisions submitted. So I would read now the decisions directed to the Secretariat. 19.AA, no less than 1 year after entry into force of the decisions adopted at 19th meeting of Conference of the Parties, the Secretariat shall issue a notification to the parties requesting the following information. Small a, whether there have been any implementation issues concerning the annotation #4, exemption for finished products packaged and ready for retail trade of cosmetics containing parts and derivatives of specimens of Platypus striata, Cycnochus coperi, Castrodia lata, Phalaenopsis amabilis, and Phalaenopsis lobi, and if so, describe the issues. Small b, where the parties have identified any conservation impacts of the annotation #4 exempting on the status of Platyla striata, Cycnochus coberi, Castrodialata, Phalaenopsis amabilis, and Phalaenopsis lobi in the wild. And small c, based on the responses received, prepare a report to the Standing Committee on implementation challenges and to the Plants Committee on conservation impacts of the exemption. Then decisions directed to the parties. 19.bb, parties are encouraged to submit pertinent information concerning the annotation #4 exemption for finished products packaged and ready for retail trade of cosmetics containing parts and derivatives of specimens of Platyla striata, Cycnochus coberi, Castrodialata, Phalaenopsis amabilis, and Phalaenopsis lobi as requested in decision 19.aa. And decisions directed to the Plants Committee, 19.cc, the Plants Committee shall small
So I see China, followed by the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Chair. China is pleased to see this proposal submitted by Switzerland. This work represents the significant progress obtained from intersessional studies over the three past meetings of the Conference of the Parties. We thank the Plants Committee and the chairs of the intersessional working groups for their efforts. The proposed annotation amendments and exemptions, while improving regulatory efficiency in parties to the Convention, also ensured that CITES regulation covers and focuses on crude and processed products exported by range states that first appeared in international trade. This is consistent with the requirements of Resolution Conf 11.21, Rev CoP18, use of annotations in Appendices 1 and 2. In relation to the species concerned in this proposal, China provided 2 reference cases to the study of the Plant Committee. As stated in the proposal, Platyla striata and Gastrodia elata are widely cultivated in China and are already dominating the international trade. These two species have been collected from wild for traditional medicinal purposes and traded in small quantities in local villages and towns in China. The update of China's key protected species of wild plants, the enforcement of China's domestic legislation, and the implementation of the domestic code for good agricultural practice can ensure the effective monitoring of the international trade in these two species. In this connection, China supports this proposal and the draft decisions proposed by Switzerland. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, China. I now give the floor to the Republic of Korea, followed by Canada.
Thank you, Chair. The Republic of Korea would like to thank Switzerland for preparing this proposal. Korea is one of the range states for Platyla striata and Gastrodia elata out of the 5 species in this proposal. We would like to underline that for the last decade, no wild plants or its derivatives of either species have been exported from Korea. In addition, in the case of Gastrodia elata, we would like to emphasize that artificial propagation technologies are supported by our policies, such as the construction of smart farms by the Korean local governments. In addition, we agree that artificially propagated plants must be used as raw materials to satisfy the standards for cosmetic ingredients, as Switzerland said. Accordingly, Korea asks the parties to be in favor of adopting this proposal and draft decisions. In addition, if this proposal is adopted, we ask you to consider adding the definition of cosmetics written in the guidelines for the preparation and submission of CITES annual reports to paragraph 8 of the interpretation of the appendix. We would like to remind it was already discussed and adopted at last COP through COP 18 on 102. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Republic of Korea. I give the floor to Canada, followed by Liechtenstein.
Well, thank you, Chair. Canada commends Switzerland for the extensive research and case studies it carried out in advance of its proposal to amend annotation #4. Canada notes that virtually all international trade in the species referenced in the amendment is in artificially propagated specimens. Canada believes that the scale of artificial propagation involved and the want of evidence that wild populations of the relevant orchid species are contributing to international trade in orchid specimens supports adoption of the amendment proposed for annotation #4. Canada is therefore pleased to support the draft decision, the proposal. Canada also supports the decision submitted by Switzerland, which we believe provide an additional level of caution that further supports the amendment proposed for annotation #4. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. I give the floor now to Liechtenstein, followed by the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to express our support for the Swiss proposal and the draft decisions that were just exposed earlier. The proposal is based on several sound investigations on orchid derivatives and their origin in cosmetics. For the 5 orchid species we are dealing with here, sufficient evidence of their cultivated origin is provided. Propagation and cultivation occurs generally at an industrial scale for quality, quantity, standardization, and not ultimately cost reasons. We therefore consider that approving the proposed amendment of annotation 4 and the draft decisions is a valid way to make the application of CITES more effective. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Liechtenstein. I give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the EU and its member states. Even though we agree that most cosmetic products produced and traded by the industry do not contain any wild source material, we do not feel confident that trade in wild plants would not be facilitated in the future under these proposed exemptions. At the local and domestic level, trade in wild source medicinal products of some of the relevant orchid species outlined here has been reported, and it is known that higher prices exist in many instances for wild source materials, and even specially demanded. Gastrodia alata, one of the species, is listed as vulnerable in the IUCN Red List, and the conservation status of the other species remain unclear. A precautionary approach is suggested unless the annotation is changed to exclude source codes Y and W, which unfortunately is not now possible because this would broaden the scope of the proposal. We also note under paragraph 6b(i) of Resolution Conference 11.21, which deals with compliance, outlines that commodities that are proposed to be excluded should not first appear in international trade as exports for range states. We found that Blatilla striata cosmetics do first appear in trade from a range state. We therefore sadly cannot accept and oppose Proposal 52. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. I'll come back to the proponents in a short while, but I will offer the floor to, I see Australia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Australia would like to support the proposal from Switzerland, including the amendments introduced into the floor this evening. Thank you.
And now I see the UK. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The United Kingdom would also like to voice our support for this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I don't see any other requests from parties. I will see if there are any observers who wish to take the floor. Okay, I don't see any. If you just give me a moment. Thank you, colleagues. So I think I would go back to Switzerland as a proponent. You've heard the debate. Clearly there's been a degree of support, but the EU and its 27 member states are not in support of the proposal. So yes, I would welcome your views on what you see as the best way forward here. So Switzerland, you have the floor whenever you wish.
Thank you, Chair. We didn't quite understand what the EU was proposing in adding wording that wild and Y specimens would be excluded and that this would be an extension of the proposal. I don't think so. That would be a reduction of the scope. So we could live with such an addition, and otherwise we would want to go for a vote. Thank you.
So we're just discussing, I'll give the floor to the EU in a moment, whether your suggestion amounts to an increase in scope or not. And I think our view is really that to align with Switzerland, that would be possible. It is narrowing the scope. And if that was the case, would you like European Union to give us your sort of precise wording about how you would amend the proposed annotation? So, EU, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. If we could limit it to artificially propagated material only, I think we would be very happy. Yeah.
Okay, so can you maybe consult with your colleagues and give us the kind of precise wording that you would like to see, perhaps?
So at the end of annotation 4, so finished products artificially propagated and packaged and ready for the retail trade of cosmetics containing parts and derivatives of the species then. So finished products artificially propagated and packaged and ready, yeah.
So perhaps maybe your wording, European Union, needs to be finished products derived from artificial propagation, comma, packaged and ready for the retail trade. Would that work better?
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
And I take it, Switzerland, would you be content with that change?
Yes.
You okay? Yeah. So with that amendment, and given the level of support and the absence of opposition now, I think we can adopt Proposal 52 with the amendment proposed by the European Union and with the draft decisions read into the record by Switzerland. And I don't see any requests from the floor, so I conclude that that is the recommendation from this committee, and we have done so by consensus. So the next item on this evening's agenda is to look at two ComDocs, which have been online for a while now. The first of these is COM1 number 3. It relates to agenda item 82 on medicinal and aromatic plant species. We have a series of draft decisions which were prepared by the drafting group I created, which consisted of China, the United States, the European Union, the chair of the Plants Committee, and Traffic, and I'm very grateful for that, to that group for proposing these decisions. So with that, I would open the floor for any comments from parties on these draft decisions. And if there are no requests from the floor, as there aren't at the moment, I will assume that we're happy to adopt these by consensus. I will see if there are any comments from observers. And I don't see any, so I conclude on that basis that this committee recommends by consensus that these draft decisions are adopted. And that concludes our discussion on item 82. We now move on to COP19 COM1 number 4, which is on a series of draft decisions and a resolution on marine turtles, Chelonidae and Mochelidae, which arose from the work of a working group on marine turtles, which was, I think, created on our first day, quite a large working group. The European Union chaired this, and I'm very grateful to the European Union for their work in bringing this to a conclusion. So with that, I invite comments from parties on the draft decision and draft resolution contained in COM1 number 4. And I don't see any comments from parties. I'll give the opportunity to any observers to comment. And I don't see any. Oh, I see Israel followed by China. So you have the floor, Israel.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You're moving quite quickly, and I apologize if I'm not keeping up. I just wanted some clarification on resolution 4.25 that appears in this document on page 3. The text that's in the second paragraph agrees that the scope and effect of a reservation entered in accordance with Article 15, paragraph 3 is the same as the scope and effect of the amendment. This language may have been clear after hours of deliberation in the COM group, but I think it leaves a lot of ambiguity, and I was wondering perhaps if the head of this group would perhaps explain what the intention is here, because before we make any specific suggestions for change, we'd like to hear a little bit of why it's worded that way.
So can you just, we're kind of looking for the right paragraph here, and we're not entirely sure which paragraph you're on. So this is the draft resolution on marine turtles, and you're referring, if Israel, if you could just clarify exactly which paragraph you're referring to.
I may be in the wrong document. I'm sorry. Okay, I think I'm in the wrong document. Okay, apologize, Cap.
It's no problem. There's lots of documents and lots of papers to look at. I know it's hard to keep up. So that issue doesn't relate to this document. So I see China, you have requested the floor. So
thanks for the efforts made by working group. China has implemented the action plan for marine turtle conservation in 2019, which covers the action plans for the next 15 years. China supports the new decision and the new resolution suggested by the working group. Thank you.
Thank you, China, for those comments. And I'm assuming that there are no requests on the floor from parties, that all the parties here are content with the draft decision and draft resolution also. I can give an opportunity to observers to speak if they wish to do so. I don't see any requests, so again, I conclude on that basis that this committee recommends by consensus that the draft decision and resolution contained in COP19 COM 1.4 can be recommended for adoption. I'm just going to check we don't have any decisions to delete on items 64.1 or 2. Thank you for your patience. We're just making sure we delete the right series of decisions. So I think on the basis of the ComDoc that we've just recommended for adoption, that we delete decisions 18.210 to 18.216 as they've now been implemented. So that does conclude our discussions on on documents 64.1 and 64.2. So with that, we start to move on to the next series of proposals that I suggested we discuss this evening. So we will do, and we're making very good progress. We move on to proposal 34 for the Centrolenidae species, glass frogs for inclusion in Appendix 2. A number of proponent countries that I won't read out now, but I invite one of those to introduce the document to us. So if one of the proponents wishes to press the microphone button, the floor will be yours. So I see Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Las ranas de cristal son especies hermosas, muy poco conocidas por los científicos y emblema de la región de Latinoamérica. Desde que llegamos a Panamá, las ranas de cristal nos han acompañado, al igual que los jaguares y tiburones en el logo de esta COP de las Américas. Esto refleja la importancia para la región de este grupo de anfibios. Esta propuesta es presentada por Costa Rica y Argentina, Brasil, Costa de Marfil, República Dominicana, Ecuador, El Salvador, Gabón, Guinea, Níger, Panamá, Perú, Togo y los Estados Unidos. Pero además, esta propuesta está respaldada por Belice, Guatemala, Honduras, Venezuela, Surinam, Guyana, Trinidad y Tobago y Bolivia, todos países del rango de distribución de las ranas de cristal. También tenemos apoyo de países de África, Asia y Oceanía, quienes comparten con Latinoamérica la preocupación por el uso insostenible de nuestras especies en mercados ilegales de países desarrollados. Casi el 60% de todas las especies de ranas de cristal evaluadas por la lista roja de especies amenazadas de la UICN tienen algún grado de amenaza. La familia Centrolenidae incluye 10 especies en peligro crítico, 28 especies en peligro, 21 especies vulnerables, 39 como casi amenazadas o con datos deficientes que según los mismos criterios de la UICN por el principio precautorio deben ser consideradas como especies amenazadas. Las ranas de cristal son especies muy difíciles de estudiar en su hábitat natural, por lo que mucha de la información de sus poblaciones no tiene estudios de campo recientes, o los que hay son para lugares muy particulares, muy específicos dentro de los inclusive supuestos rangos de distribución de las mismas. Hay especies que lo único que tienen son información oral proporcionada por algunos investigadores. Estamos pidiendo que se regule el comercio, se ordene y que no favorezca el comercio ilegal, contar con información clara y concreta de cuántas ranas están ingresando a mercados mundiales y que se garantice, dentro de las limitaciones del comercio, que estas ranas no estén saliendo de nuestros países en mercados ilegales, como está ocurriendo en la actualidad. Queremos usar esta convención que promueve la cooperación internacional a fin de proteger a las ranas de cristal de la explotación sin control al incluir toda la familia en el apéndice 2 de CITES. La propuesta 34 pide la inclusión de todas las especies de la familia Centrolenidae en el apéndice 2, basados 2 especies de conformidad con el párrafo A del artículo 2 de la Convención que satisface los criterios B del anexo 2A de la resolución. Adicionalmente, se presenta la inclusión de las demás especies de ranas de cristal en el apéndice 2 de conformidad con el párrafo 2B del artículo 2 de la Convención, que cumple con el criterio A del anexo 2B de la resolución COP, Conferencia 924, Rev. COP 17. Esto último, al ser especies tan parecidas entre sí, que es prácticamente imposible diferenciar entre especies. Desde la última COP, esta propuesta ha sido actualizada con el apoyo de científicos expertos en anfibios, pero hemos incluido la información de las autoridades de aplicación de la ley, de policías como CEPRONA, la red de Jaguar, Interpol y Fiscalías y Policías Nacionales. Cuando las autoridades policiales de un país detectan un fenómeno criminal a nivel policial, implica que ya existen volúmenes de casos significativos y que las estructuras criminales están organizadas en todas sus fases del proceso de tráfico. La información sobre la organización del crimen alrededor de las ranas de cristal es un hecho incuestionable, donde se sabe que lo que estamos viendo es la punta del iceberg. Cuando se combina la necesidad económica con un lucrativo mercado como es el de las ranas de cristal, que según información de CEPRONA de España y otras policías europeas, se puede pagar hasta 900 euros por un solo individuo de ranas de cristal. Los cuerpos policiales tienen claridad de la existencia de grupos delictivos bien organizados que operan en nuestros países, pero sus bases son los países europeos. Y estos han convertido la explotación de ranas de cristal en una actividad mercantil profesional. Las ofertas que se hacen en sitio web y ferias de mascotas de Europa de especies de la región latinoamericana no tienen ninguna trazabilidad. La mayoría de nuestros países no tienen registro de las salidas de estas especies con fines comerciales. Y una preocupación más grave aún, que los registros oficiales de muchos de nuestros países indican que han salido con fines científicos, no comerciales. Los datos del EMIS, que es una de las pocas bases de datos que hay organizada de especies, la EMIS de Estados Unidos, muestra que se ha incrementado en un 44.000% la cantidad de especímenes que están llegando al comercio en Estados Unidos. Esto implica que en los últimos años, del 2016 al 2021, la cantidad de ranas que han llegado a Estados Unidos son de más de 15.000 individuos. La mayoría de países donde se importan especies no CITES no tiene trazabilidad sobre estas especies. Para aquellos que pueden sentir que esta propuesta aún no es necesaria, hemos visto una y otra vez cuán rápido las poblaciones de ranas pueden disminuir literalmente de la noche a la mañana. Desde la abundancia hasta la extinción, más aún especies que son sometidas a la presión del comercio sin regulación, como la que tenemos certeza que ocurre en este momento con las ranas de cristal. Todo esto refleja, señor presidente, la necesidad de la inclusión en el apéndice 2. Se necesita con urgencia para proteger a estas especies, generar información robusta sobre el comercio internacional y garantizar que todo este comercio no amenace la supervivencia de estas especies silvestres, especialmente de estos grupos como los anfibios, que son de los más amenazados que tenemos en el planeta. Gracias.
Thank you, Costa Rica. And, before I even opened the floor for parties, I seem to acquired a very long queue, but I would ask people just to wait until I open the floor. But I do now invite contributions from parties. And I will, and also I see a number of proponents asking for the floor. So I'll give the floor to Kuwait, followed by the Gambia.
Thank you, Chair. Kuwait believe that the species meet the criteria to be included in Appendix 2, so we would like to support the listing of this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuwait. I give the floor, I think I said, to the Gambia.
Thank you, Chair. The Gambia thanks the proponent for submitting this proposal, which provides further evidence and support to justify including this family in Appendix 2 to ensure trade is legal, transparent, and sustainable. We are pleased to support the proposal and encourage all parties to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. The Gambia, I give the floor now to Mali. You have the floor.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président. Je voulais profiter aussi pour remercier et féliciter davantage les pays qui ont eu l'amabilité de présenter cette proposition pour le transfert de l'espèce à l'annexe 2. Monsieur le Président, c'est important et c'est catastrophique en même temps. Nous sommes en face d'une situation pour des espèces de cette taille qui, du reste, on a constaté qu'il y a au moins 12 espèces qui sont déjà importés aux États-Unis. Et je remercie les États-Unis qui ont aussi contribué à faire voir la situation actuelle par rapport à cette espèce. Quand on voit sa population, il y a au moins 10 espèces qui sont en danger critique d'extinction, 28 en danger, 21 vulnérables, 11 quasi menacés, 55 préoccupations minières et 28 dont les données sont insuffisantes au niveau de l'ICN en 2019. Et les autres espèces n'ont encore pas été évaluées. Monsieur le Président, il est important, il est nécessaire, il est temps qu'on fasse changer le statut de cette espèce, de l'amener au moins dans l'annexe 2, qui certainement, un jour viendra, on va aussi parler de son transfert à l'annexe 1. Donc, je voulais inciter, demander aux autres partis de la coalition d'appuyer cette proposition et le transfert de cette espèce à l'annexe 2. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Marley. I've got a very long list of speakers. It's already gone off the screen, so I can't see everyone necessarily. And it is an evening session, so I ask you all to be very brief. Depends how late you want to stay, of course. I'll give the floor to Senegal, followed by Argentina.
Voilà, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Donc, le Sénégal félicite l'ensemble des auteurs, des co-auteurs qui ont eu à proposer cette proposition, donc qui reflète une préoccupation majeure pour un groupe d'espèces, parce qu'il y a plusieurs types de grenouilles de verre. Donc, le Sénégal appuie cette proposition qui cadre parfaitement avec le souci de conservation. Nous voyons clairement que cette espèce est menacée par le commerce international. Les données sont claires, donc à travers l'exposition des co-auteurs. Donc nous nous rallions à cette proposition. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I give the floor to Argentina. As a co-proponent, I would ask, as I always have, ask the co-proponents to be brief because there is a number of you, but you have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente. Argentina, como coproponente, también desea señalar cuáles son, a nuestro entender, las principales razones para apoyar esta propuesta de inclusión de la familia Centrolénidae, ranas de cristal, en el apéndice 2 de CITES. Se han identificado como una amenaza que afecta a estas especies al comercio internacional ilícito de ejemplares de varias especies para mascotismo, las cuales terminan a la venta en países de la Unión Europea, Estados Unidos principalmente. También, a partir de datos obtenidos de diferentes fuentes, se ha verificado que este comercio ha aumentado en forma significativa en los últimos 5 años. Se propone incluir a toda la familia Centrolénidae debido a lo difícil que resulta la identificación de las distintas especies, solo identificables algunas mediante técnicas de análisis genético. Como se ha señalado en la propuesta, se cumple con los criterios establecidos en el artículo 2 de la Convención y en la resolución 9.24. CITES es la herramienta internacional que nos va a permitir conocer y registrar el nivel de comercio de estas especies, involucrando tanto a países exportadores como importadores. Actualmente la información existente es muy poca y no es del todo fidedigna. La inclusión de toda la familia Centrolénidae es vital para poder realizar la correcta implementación de ser aprobada esta propuesta, debido a la gran similitud entre las especies. Argentina quiere señalar además que con la aprobación de esta propuesta no estaríamos afectando el uso de un recurso por parte de comunidades locales ni ninguna otra actividad basada en comercio lícito. El objetivo de esta propuesta es poder contar con información suficiente sobre comercio internacional para poder contrarrestar el tráfico ilegal y el comercio ilícito. Argentina solicita a las partes el apoyo a esta propuesta. Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Argentina. I'll give the floor to Cuba, followed by Panama.
Gracias, señor presidente. Cuba quiere sumarse al apoyo de la propuesta 34 Pensamos que la propuesta va a favorecer el control de esta familia que está sometida a un comercio ilegal importante. Por tanto, nosotros apoyamos firmemente esta propuesta. Gracias.
Thank you, Cuba. I give the floor now to Panama.
Muchísimas gracias, señor presidente. Panamá, parte coproponente de la enmienda 34, considera que es altamente conveniente y necesario la inclusión de las ranas de cristal en el apéndice 2 de las CITES, toda vez que hay argumentos sólidos que dan soporte a esta propuesta. Es innegable el alto interés que tienen estas hermosas pero frágiles ranitas para las personas que participan de las actividades del mascotismo, lo cual lo podrán comprobar con una búsqueda rápida en Internet, observándose múltiples sitios que las ofrecen en venta en el mercado internacional. Es decir, que es indiscutible que el comercio, especialmente el no regulado, es actualmente una amenaza para la conservación de dichas especies. También queremos reiterar que el fundamento de la inclusión de la familia completa radica en el hecho de la gran similitud entre las especies, cuya diferenciación resulta ser un gran reto incluso para los expertos. Por ello, la inclusión total permitiría una mayor eficacia en la implementación de esta enmienda. Ello facilitaría enormemente el trabajo de los funcionarios de aduanas y fiscales ambientales para ejercer sus roles de fiscalización tal cual nos los han hecho saber. Por lo antes dicho, le solicitamos muy respetuosamente a las partes considerar brindar su apoyo a la enmienda 34. Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Panama. I'll give the floor to Mauritania, to be followed by the Congo. I would ask parties, I say a very long list. Please just say whether you're in favour or if you have concerns or opposition, really, so that we can get through this and form a picture of how the room is feeling at the moment. So I think I said Mauritania followed by the Congo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, de m'avoir donné l'occasion de m'exprimer sur cette proposition. Avant tout, je tiens vraiment à féliciter les auteurs et co-auteurs de cette proposition. Je trouve que c'est une action assez louable. La Mauritanie exprime son plein soutien en faveur de la proposition visant à inclure les grenouilles de verre à l'annexe 2. Il est important de ne pas oublier que la Convention demande que les propositions soient préparées avec les meilleures informations et données scientifiques disponibles. Et nous constatons que c'est bien le cas sur cette proposition. En outre, nous devons garder à l'esprit l'importance de prendre en compte le principe de l'approche de précaution en cas d'incertitude. Compte tenu de toutes ces raisons, nous soutenons pleinement cette proposition. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mauritania. I'll give the floor to the Congo, I said, followed by Guatemala. Again, a request, just keep your comments very much focused on whether you're supporting or opposing. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Le Congo tient à exprimer son soutien plein et entier envers cette proposition. Il est crucial que nous veillions à ce que le commerce international de cette famille d'amphibiens remarquable soit durable. D'autant plus qu'elle est actuellement totalement non réglementée, bien qu'elle soit protégée dans de nombreux États de l'aire de répartition. Nous demandons instamment à toutes les parties de soutenir la proposition. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. The Congo, I give the floor to Guatemala, followed by Sri Lanka.
Gracias, señor presidente. Guatemala, como país megadiverso, se suma al apoyo de esta importante propuesta. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Guatemala. That's the kind of intervention I like, short and to the point. I'll give the floor to Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Chair. Sri Lanka also supports the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri Lanka. I've got 28 parties on the list waiting to speak. So if everybody speaks for a few minutes, you're going to be here quite a long time. And a lot of you, I think, are going to be saying the same thing. So really, I'm good, and I have a lot of the co-proponents also on the list wanting to speak. And again, I'm assuming you all support your proposal, so I'm going to try and pick parties that are not proponents, so I get a feel for what the full perspective from the room is. So 28 proponents, if you all talk for 2.5, 3 minutes, that's quite a long time. So it's up to you, it's your evening. We can stay here forever if you want. But the interpreters won't stay forever, I know. But so please, 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 just get to the point. So I heard last from Sri Lanka. I'll give the floor now to Liberia, followed by the United States.
Thank you, Chair. Liberia warmly support the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. That's what we like. United States, in terms of brevity, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The United States is pleased to support the co-proponents, as a co-proponent of this proposal. We've seen rapidly increasing trade in these species to the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. It's hard for me to pick out who are the co-proponents and who aren't, but I am going to look for non-co-proponents at the moment. So I'll give the floor to China, followed by India.
Thank you, Chair. China also supports this proposal. Thank you.
I give the floor to India, followed by Israel.
Thank you, Chair. India also supports the proposal.
Okay, I give the floor now to Israel, I think I said.
Thank you, Chair. Israel also supports the proposal.
Okay, I'll give the floor to the European Union, and then I may... European Union, followed by Canada, and then I may change tack a little. European Union, then Canada.
Thank you, Chair. And I will be not that brief, if you allow me, because I am going to voice a bit a dissenting voice in this case. Indeed, the assessments made by the European Union of Proposal 34 reveal that only one species out of the 158 may meet the CITES listing criteria. And according to our assessment, all other species do not comply with the listing criterion in Article 2, Paragraph 2A, as there is no indication that current or expected trade poses a threat to any species of the family. Recorded international trade is restricted to few non-threatened species, and there is no reference to a specific demand for threatened taxa. Therefore, the EU suggests the proponents to reduce the proposal substantially. The EU is also concerned about the application of the lookalike criterion, as no evidence is provided that each of the species proposed, according to Article 2, Paragraph 2b, resemble at least one of the species proposed according to Article 2, Paragraph 2a. Furthermore, there are no externally discernible characters which would allow identifying a frog as belonging to the family Centrolenidae, and striking similarities exist between members of this family and species belonging to at least 5 other frog families. While the EU acknowledges that listing high taxa can make enforcement easier in some cases, customs officers would depend on experts to know whether a frog is a member of family glass frogs. The EU believes that reducing the scope of the proposal would significantly increase the applicability and still ensure the protection of all species which might be affected by trade. To meet the concerns of the proponents about trade which violates their national legislation, we recommend listing all species of the family Centrolenidae in Appendix 3. This would ensure that only legally exported specimens enter international trade. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union. I'll give the floor now to Canada, followed by Chile.
Thank you, Chair. We will be brief. We thank the proponent for preparing this proposal. Canada aligning itself with the European Union view. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. I give the floor now to Chile.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Queremos agradecer a los países proponentes por esta contundente presentación. Nos parece que los antecedentes presentados cumplen con los criterios para ser incluidos en el apéndice 2 de la Convención, por lo que apoyamos su inclusión. Hacemos un fuerte llamado a las partes a apoyar esta propuesta. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to Colombia, followed by Kenya.
Gracias, señor presidente. Colombia agradece a Costa Rica y a los coproponentes por la propuesta 34 para la inclusión de todas las especies de la familia Centrolénidae en el apéndice 2 de las CITES y por llamar nuestra atención en relación con la situación de los anfibios en general. Sobre este tema quisiéramos resaltar que este es un tema de especial importancia para Colombia, dado que somos el cuarto país con mayor número de anfibios a nivel global y uno de los mayores países con diversidad de la familia Centrolénidae, al contar con 80 especies, de las cuales 35 son endémicas y cuya protección es una de nuestras prioridades en materia de conservación de la biodiversidad. Desde las autoridades científicas y administrativas hemos hecho una juiciosa revisión a nivel nacional con base en los criterios de la resolución 924. Identificamos que para algunas de las especies existe una preocupación sobre el tráfico ilegal. Y de otra parte, la reciente evaluación global de la UICN, en la que han participado algunos expertos nacionales, identificó que las circunstancias que han llevado a algunas de las especies de Centrolénidae a estar en alguna categoría de amenaza son distintas e incluyen pérdida de hábitat, cambio climático y enfermedades. En ese sentido, Colombia considera que es necesario fortalecer la generación de información, así como la implementación de las decisiones del documento 60 sobre conservación de anfibios, con la cual se espera compilar y analizar información sobre impactos del comercio sobre estas especies, así como los retos de observancia, entre otros, de tal manera que se contribuya a cerrar algunas brechas de información y contar con datos sólidos que permita tomar decisiones con mayor certidumbre. Por lo anterior, Colombia expresa su preocupación frente a la inclusión de 158 especies sin abordar previamente algunos de los vacíos de información. Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Colombia. I said I'd give the floor to Kenya, then followed by Indonesia.
Thank you, Chair. To provide for regulation of trade in the glass frogs, control illegal trade, and monitor the legal trade, Kenya supports the proposal to include the entire family of the glass frogs, Centrolinidae, in Appendix 2. So we support the adoption of the proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kenya. I give the floor now to Indonesia.
Thank you, Chair. Indonesia appreciates proponents of this proposal as well as the progress made by proponents since it proposed in the last CoP18. Concerning a look-like species and precautionary consideration in implementing CITES regulation, Indonesia support for inclusion this family into CITES Appendix 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. I think I said, I've forgotten who I said after Indonesia. Well, I'll give the floor to Uruguay.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Uruguay apoya plenamente esta propuesta. Gracias.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to Cameroon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le Cameroun appuie cette proposition.
I still have about 14 parties, I think, asking for the floor. If you're kind of coming in to indicate support, or I'll put this another way, it would be quite helpful to me to know if there's any additional opposition to this proposal. And I know all the proponents, several proponents still asking for the floor. There are some non-proponents that I would like to go through, but if you remove your button now, I would take that as indicating your support, and I would then look to those non-proponent parties that are left as presumably indicating they want to express their opposition. Okay, so as the non-proponents, I see Somalia and then Benin.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to request you, when you are going to mention the names of the country, to be fair and not prefer one from the other. Somalia fully supports the glass frogs to be enlisted in Abradex 2, and I think we have reached the time glass frogs meet the criteria. It's a responsibility to all range states to be conserving this precious species. Thank you.
Thank you, Somalia. I give the floor now to Benin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je tenais à prendre la parole quand même pour exprimer le soutien du Bénin à cette proposition et félicite les auteurs et les co-auteurs pour cette proposition. En effet, le fait même que la similitude cause de problèmes, ce serait difficile de mettre des experts au niveau des points de contrôle pour pouvoir faire la différence. Nous, le Bénin soutient donc la proposition. Merci.
I give the floor now to Burkina Faso.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Cette proposition bénéficiant d'un soutien aussi fort de la part des États de l'aide de répartition devrait être considérée avec la plus grande attention. Comme la proposition le décrit, bon nombre de ces États de l'aide de répartition ont déjà interdit l'exportation de ces espèces au niveau national. Mais le commerce illégal des grenouilles de verre persiste. Le Burkina Faso, en soutenant cette proposition, permettra d'aider ces pays à atteindre leurs objectifs de conservation tout en mettant fin au commerce illégal et non durable de ces espèces. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Burkina Faso. I think I have 7 parties still requesting the floor, and I'm just checking my list of the proponents, but you are all proponent countries. And so it seems to me I can take it you are supportive. Do you still want to take the floor? I can hopefully bring things to a conclusion a bit more quickly if you do not, but I can give you the floor if you insist, but I would ask you to be very, very brief. Okay, I see the numbers are going down. That's good. I give the floor to Niger, then Dominican Republic.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président. Nous, en tant que co-auteurs de cette proposition, nous insistons quand même à légitimer notre position, tout en disant que nous sommes heureux de soutenir ces partis étant auteurs de cette proposition. Donc, il est crucial que nous soutenions ces États de l'aide de répartition des grenouilles verts et demandons aussi aux autres États de soutenir la dite proposition. Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Dominican Republic, followed by Guinea. Very, very brief, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. República Dominicana, como país que actualmente ocupa la presidencia pro tempore de la Comisión de Ambiente y Desarrollo, organismo responsable de la agenda ambiental regional, lo cual influye en este escenario de COP19, se ha unido como coproponente para la propuesta 34 a Costa Rica. Nuestro país, como por su condición insular, posee un alto endemismo, hasta con un 97% de sus anfibios siendo endémicos, razón por la cual siempre hemos asumido con gran responsabilidad la conservación y uso sostenible de la vida silvestre. Apoyamos como coproponente a las ranas de cristal, ya que regular su uso en comercio garantizaría su supervivencia. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
So I now give the floor to Guinea, then Brazil, then Gabon, and that concludes the list of parties, and I'm closing the list.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La Guinée apporte son soutien en tant que co-auteur de cette proposition et demande aux partis de soutenir cette proposition d'inscription des grenouilles de verre à l'annexe 2. Nous reconnaissons la nécessité de réglementer le commerce international de ces espèces et de répondre à l'appel des co-auteurs pour que la CITES aide la communauté internationale à protéger ces espèces de la menace du commerce international des animaux de compagnie. Nous avons examiné les documents relatifs à la proposition d'inscription et nous pensons qu'ils contiennent suffisamment des preuves du déclin de la population et du commerce international des espèces pour justifier une inscription à l'annexe 2. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Guinea, Brazil, then Gabon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank you for giving me the floor. As you request, I will be brief. Brazil, as co-proponent, would like to thank the other co-sponsors for presenting this proposal. Inclusion in Appendix 2 seeks to ensure that the harvesting of wild species does not reduce the populations to a level that their survival may be threatened by continued harvesting or other impacts. We therefore urge other parties to support the proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. And finally, I give the floor to Gabon.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Le Gabon sera bref, comme vous l'avez demandé. En tant que co-auteur de cette proposition d'inscription des grenouilles de verre à l'annexe 2 de la CITES, nous souhaitons vraiment encourager les partis à soutenir cette proposition. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Gabon. So that concludes the list of parties. I will see if any observers wish to take the floor. I may look to give the floor to a couple. Just give me a minute. Okay, I'll give the floor to the Pet Advocacy Network, I think it is. If you, again, could be brief, please.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief. It's obvious this proposal does not meet the requirements for listing. None of the species are traded in significant numbers internationally. Most are very common. The habitat destruction combined with the impacts of chytric fungus are the cause of the population's declines where they are occurring. While there was a spike in legal trade for a few years after these species entered the pet trade, that trade has dropped precipitously and consistently over the past several years. This is because these are species that are easily bred in captivity. In fact, current trade in these species is now dominated by trade in captive bred specimens. And as Israel so eloquently pointed out during debate on item 89, Prop 40, since trade is not contributing to the decline in population, then a listing is not appropriate. Finally, The greatest threat to glass frogs is the chytrid fungus, a very serious threat that the pet trade is doing more to attempt to solve than any government agency, and one that may well rely on the captive bred specimens for repopulation once it is resolved. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Pet Advocacy Network. I'll give the floor to HSI. Again, a request to be brief, please.
Gracias, señor presidente. Realizamos esta intervención a nombre de Humane Society International, Defenders of Wildlife, Pro-Wildlife, IFO, Animal Welfare Institute, Species Survival Network y otras 15 organizaciones de las cuales se enviará el listado por escrito a la Secretaría. Queremos manifestar nuestro rotundo apoyo a los 14 proponentes por la propuesta para incluir a la familia centrolenidad en el apéndice 2 de las CITES. Debemos asegurarnos de que estas especies estén debidamente protegidas de cualquier impacto negativo del comercio. Además, desde la perspectiva de aplicación de la ley en puntos de inspección, existe una gran similitud entre las diversas especies, por lo que incluir solo algunas especies haría prácticamente imposible para los inspectores distinguirlas, ya que incluso muchas solo se pueden identificar analizando su ADN. Si solo se incluyen algunas especies en esta propuesta, la demanda definitivamente se desplazará hacia las que no están protegidas por las CITES, algo que hemos visto que ocurre con otras especies silvestres. Estos carismáticos anfibios son un símbolo para la región latinoamericana y del Caribe, y por todas estas razones coincidimos con los coproponentes en incluir la familia centrolenidad en el apéndice 2 de las CITES e instamos a las partes a que apoyen esta propuesta. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Okay, I only have two other observers requesting the floor, so on this occasion I will give them both the floor, but again, brief, please, because the evening is kind of moving on and we want to move on to other topics. So I give the German Society for Herpetology, then the China Biodiversity Green Development Foundation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We recommend parties not to adopt that proposal as it has been submitted because, based on our analysis, the criteria for an inclusion in Appendix 2 are not met. By far the most serious threats to glass frogs is habitat loss, spread of specific diseases such as the chytrid fungus, and climate change. After the respective proposal of CoP18, 153 glass frog species have been reassessed by IUCN. For none of these species, the international trade has been identified as a major threat. Of the 12 species proposed now for inclusion in Appendix 2, according to Article 2, Paragraph 2a of the Convention and to Criterion B in the Annex 2a of Resolution Conf 924 Rev CoP17, all but one are assessed as least concern by the IUCN, while this latter species has been assessed as data deficient. Additionally, we would like to emphasize that glass frogs can be determined by trained inspectors using the available determination keys. So there is little evidence that glass frogs meet Criterion A in Annex 2B of the respective resolution. We recommend that the supporting range states assess the population status of their glass frog species and then might take into consideration an Appendix 3 listing of those species that might be or become pertinent in the scope of collection for the international pet trade. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And finally, to the China Biodiversity Green Development Foundation, you have the floor again. Please be very brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to note that while 17% of amphibian species are in trade, only 2.4% are within the remit of CITES. This includes the glass frogs not being represented. From our analysis, we find that several species are actually in trade within the European Union which are not in this list because of a lack of databasing within the European Union. These species are uniquely identifiable by their clear abdomens as well as having green bones, meaning that whilst it's been stated they are confusable with other frog species, this is not in fact the case unless we conflate all tree frogs with looking the same, which I hope this room would agree that they do not. Conservation of these species is essential, and an Appendix 3 listing would not be appropriate given that many species extend across more than one country. We would urge all participants to support this proposal, being that it has been given by the range states, and demand in areas like the EU is fueling the extinction of these species, but sufficient data cannot be gathered because of a lack of systematic data collection by countries where they are being imported. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The China Biodiversity Green Development Foundation. So we've had quite a long debate on this proposal. There has been a lot of support expressed in the room. There's also been some reservations expressed, and that included the European Union and its 27 member states. I would like to go back to the European Union and ask you, suggested, I think, that the parties reduce their scope, and I think you were suggesting that an Appendix 3 listing was more appropriate for the family. But I just wondered if you would, A, clarify what you meant by reducing the scope, precisely what your suggestion was, so that I can then go back to the proponents to see if they would be willing to reduce the scope at all. And then secondly, if that isn't the case, do you want to take this to a vote to resolve? There's clearly not a consensus. I haven't tried to add up the numbers in total, but so European Union first, I would like your reflections, and I'll go back to the proponents.
Thank you, Chair, for giving us the opportunity to express our views after listening to the floor. We have given our opinion on this proposal, our arguments, but we have also listened and heard the floor a very clear support and large support for the proposal. So we are not blocking consensus on this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union. And I assume, Canada, you would take the same position. Yes, I see your heads nodding. So I think on that basis, we can conclude that this committee recommends by consensus, but noting the reservations raised by the European Union and Canada, that this proposal be adopted. So with that, we conclude Proposal 34. We now move on to Proposal 35 on Agalicnis lemur. This is a proposal to include the species in Appendix 2 with the zero export quota for wild-taken specimens traded for commercial purposes. The proponents were Colombia, Costa Rica, the European Union, and Panama, and I invite one of the proponents to introduce Proposal 35. Panama, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Me complace en presentar como país coproponente, en conjunto con la Unión Europea, Costa Rica y Colombia, la propuesta número 35, cuyo objetivo es incluir la rana Agalicnis lemur en el apéndice 2, de conformidad con lo establecido en el artículo 2, párrafo 2A de la Convención, y porque cumple con el criterio B del anexo 2A de la resolución CONF 2.24, con un cupo de exportación anual nulo para los especímenes capturados en el medio silvestre destinados a transacciones con fines comerciales. Esta rana en particular se distribuye en Costa Rica, Panamá y Colombia. Se trata de una especie nocturna y arborícola que se reproduce en charcas o aguas estancadas. Coloca su huevo en una masa gelatinosa en vez de las hojas de la vegetación o en el margen de las charcas. Es una especie muy llamativa por sus grandes ojos amarillos y la ausencia de membranas interdigitales, que la distingue del resto de las especies de la misma, y la misma despierta el interés de la investigación científica, pero también para los traficantes, lo que es visible al ver sitios en Internet que promocionan su comercio en mercados internacionales. Los precios oscilan entre 50 y 60 dólares americanos y entre 35 y 60 euros por cada animal. Un estudio encargado por la Autoridad Administrativa CITES de Alemania examinó plataformas de Internet y varias redes sociales entre el año 2017 y 2018 y encontraron anuncios de Agalichin lemur en sitios web. Por consiguiente, se convirtió en la segunda especie del género Agalichin con el mayor número de anuncios en línea durante ese periodo de estudio. Y sin lugar a dudas, en los últimos años, la venta de especímenes en tiendas virtuales se ha incrementado, facilitando su adquisición por parte de los coleccionistas. Pero probablemente todo lo que alcancemos ver a través de estas tiendas solamente sea la punta del iceberg respecto al verdadero alcance del comercio de la especie en detrimento de sus poblaciones en el medio silvestre. Por lo tanto, de esta especie en el apéndice 2 facilitaría mayor eficacia en la fiscalización y trazabilidad, garantizando un comercio más responsable en cumplimiento con todos los instrumentos legales y compromisos de las partes. También es importante mencionar que, de acuerdo con los criterios de la lista roja de la UICN, está catalogada como en peligro crítico. Por otro lado, la adopción de esta propuesta resolvería los problemas de nomenclatura y aplicación identificados en el informe del especialista del Comité de Fauna, expresados en el documento AC31, DOC 37, que describe en prestar especial atención al caso de Philomedusa lemur. Si bien es cierto, el género Agalichnis sp. está incluido en el apéndice 2. La especie Philomedusa lemur no está incluida en el apéndice 2 de las CITES. La referencia estándar para el género Agalichnis fue adoptada, pero excluye a la especie Agalichnis lemur como miembro de este grupo, que en el pasado fue objeto de un amplio debate en cuanto a su taxonomía. En conclusión, queremos invitar a las partes que apoyen a esta propuesta para que las futuras generaciones puedan contemplar esta hermosa rana en su ambiente natural. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Panama, for that introduction, and with that, I open the floor for comments from parties. I'll begin by giving the floor to Mexico, followed by the Seychelles.
Gracias, señor presidente. Consideramos que Agalichnis lemur cumple con los criterios de inclusión en el apéndice 1 e incluso para el apéndice, para el apéndice 2 e incluso para el apéndice 1. Al parecer está presente en el comercio internacional y hay demanda para el comercio de mascotas. Los niveles de comercio internacional son aparentemente bajos y la mayoría proviene de cría en cautiverio, pero por su estado de conservación y tendencias actuales, aún niveles bajos de extracción en el medio silvestre podrían suponer un riesgo importante para la especie. Por ello, México apoya su inclusión en el apéndice 2. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mexico. I give the floor to the Seychelles, followed by the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. The Seychelles supports this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Seychelles. United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. The UK wishes to thank the proponents, Colombia, Costa Rica, EU, Panama, for this proposal to include the lemur leaf frog on Appendix 2 and express our support for this proposal. Due to the presence of this species in international trade, its dramatic and rapid recent population decline, and the restriction of the species to a small number of highly fragmented populations, we consider that this species meets the criteria for inclusion in Appendix 2. We also support the inclusion of a zero annual export quota for wild-taken specimens traded for commercial purposes, as this will ensure the remaining wild population of this critically endangered species is safeguarded. Thank you.
Thank you. United Kingdom, I'll give the floor to Senegal, followed by Mali.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Donc, dans sa logique de protéger les espèces de grenouilles qui sont très ciblées par le commerce international, le Sénégal soutient parfaitement cette proposition. Merci beaucoup.
So, Mali, you have the floor, followed by the European Union.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président. Comme l'a si bien dit tout de suite mon collègue du Sénégal, le Mali prend acte pour soutenir cette proposition. Monsieur le Président, cette espèce remplit toutes les conditions d'être inscrite à l'annexe 2. Du fait que sa population qui est en danger critique d'extinction depuis 2019, il y a un déclin observé de 80 à 95% depuis 1998. Donc une population gravement fragmentée. Donc je soutiens aussi la proposition qui a été faite par la Colombie, Costa Rica, l'Union européenne et le Panama. Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mali. I have very few requests from parties, which I'm interpreting as support for the proposal. I'll give the floor to the European Union, then Côte d'Ivoire and Mauritania, and then look to conclude with Costa Rica. So, European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. The EU, together with Colombia, Costa Rica and Panama, proposes to include Agalichnus lemur, the lemur tree frog, in Appendix 1 with a zero quota for wild-taken specimens traded for commercial purposes in accordance with Annex 2A of Resolution Conf 9/24 Ref CoP19. Agalichnus lemur is a charismatic tree frog which is currently known only from a few locations in Costa Rica and Panama, and its population status is unknown in Colombia. It has suffered an estimated 80 to 95% decline over the past 21 years and was assessed as critically endangered in the IUCN Red List in 2020 with a decreasing population trend. Agalichnus lemur is affected by a combination of habitat loss and disease. While it is unknown if the species continues to be collected from the wild, it is in demand within the pet trade and is reported in international trade as of captive bred origin. As pointed out by the representative of Panama, according to a recent study assessing the exotic pet market in Germany, Agalichnus lemur was among the most frequently offered Agalichnus species. Inclusion in Appendix 2 thus appears necessary, combined with the restriction on any commercial trade in wild specimens. The genus Agalichnus was included in Appendix 2 at CoP15. However, the listing was limited to the 5 species recognized by the standard nomenclatural reference at that time. The current CITES standard reference for amphibian recognizes 15 Agalichnus species, including Agalichnus lemur. An extract of amphibian species of the world is therefore proposed as a standard reference for the genus, which would be replace the current Appendix 2 listing for Agalichnus with individual species level listings for 7 species as outlined in the proposal, which is also included a recommendation of AC 31. We therefore invite the parties to support the proposal to list Agalichnus lemur in Appendix 2 of the Convention. Thank you.
There's a lot of interference coming over the headsets at the moment. I don't know if the technicians can resolve this. Seems to have quietened down at the moment. So we'll continue with Côte d'Ivoire, Mauritania, Costa Rica, and no further requests from the floor. So hope we can leave it there and conclude. So Côte d'Ivoire, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La Côte d'Ivoire voudrait joindre sa voix aux pays qui soutiennent cette proposition et la Côte d'Ivoire invite toutes les parties à adopter cette proposition. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Côte d'Ivoire. I give the floor to Mauritania, then Costa Rica.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Cette fois-ci, je vais être bref, comme vous l'aimez bien. La Mauritanie soutient cette proposition.
Thank you, Mauritania. I give the floor to Costa Rica. And Togo, you've requested the floor now. If it's to support, the sense I'm getting is that there is no opposition to this proposal. So if you want to oppose, then I can take your intervention, but if you're supportive, thank you, Togo. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Sí, muchas gracias, señor presidente. Costa Rica, como coproponente de la inclusión de la rana lémur con Colombia, la Unión Europea y Panamá, consideramos que cumple con los criterios de inclusión en el apéndice 2 e instamos a todas las partes a que apoyen la propuesta. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Costa Rica. The sense I'm getting is all parties are supporting the proposal. I will see if there are any observers that might want to speak about this, but if you can live without speaking, that is also desirable. I'll give the German Society for Herpetology the floor. If you could be very brief, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I can be very brief, but we would like to point out that that species would even qualify for an Appendix 1 listing, but since captive breeding is very successful, we support the proposal for an inclusion of that species in Appendix 1 and a serial annual export quota. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just one more. Thank you, colleagues. So again, based on the debate, I think we can recommend from this committee by consensus that this proposal be adopted and that given the comments made by the European Union, we also recommend that the standard reference for Agalicnis species should be the extract from Frost 2021 Amphibian Species of the World as detailed in Annex 1 of the proposal. So with that and without any further requests for the floor, I will look to move on, and that concludes our discussion of Proposal 35. Before I move on to Proposal 36, we still have nearly an hour remaining, so I do intend to continue with the listing proposals where we left off this afternoon, so we can make as much progress this evening as possible. So So with that, I will go to proposal 36, which is to include Lau Triton lauensis in Appendix 2 with a 0 export quota for wild-taken specimens traded for commercial purposes. And the proponent is the European Union. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. The EU proposes to include the species Lau Triton lauensis, the Laos wartinude, in Appendix 2 with a 0 quota for wild-taken specimens traded for commercial purposes in accordance with Annex 2A of Resolution Conf 924 Ref CoP19. The Laos wartinude is a monotypic species with a very small distribution range restricted to northern Lao PDR outside of any protected area. Shortly after the species discovery in 2002, it has been in high demand in the pet trade due to its spectacular color pattern. Overharvesting for the international pet trade, medicinal use and consumption is considered to be the primary threat to this species. Mature specimens accumulate and form large breeding groups inside pools of small streams and therefore can be easily collected from known sites with minimal effort during the breeding season. Together with a slow maturation, this increases the species' risk of overexploitation and local extirpations. As a consequence, Lau Triton lauensis has already suffered an estimated 50% decline in the last 10 years, and the species was assessed as endangered in the IUCN Red List in 2014 with a declining population trend. Due to the intrinsic vulnerability of the species, its uniqueness, and the actual and potential negative effects of trade on its wild population, the regulation of trade seems necessary, including the restriction of any commercial trade in wild specimens. We therefore invite parties to support this proposal to list Lau Triton lauensis in Appendix 2 of the Convention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union, and I open the floor for comments by parties. I see the Lao People's Democratic Republic. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Lao PDR fully support the proposal by the European Union to include Lao wartinude in CITES Appendix 2 with a yellow quota, code source W, for commercial purpose, because this species is endemic to Lao PDR with a small restrictive distribution range, which is continually threatened by habitat loss, harvesting, and collection. So we list this species in Lao PDR as a protected species list number 1, due to status being rare, nearly extinct, and of high values and special important to Lao PDR. So I encourage all parties to support this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lao PDR. I give the floor to Marley.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président. Je ne vais pas être long. C'est tout juste pour féliciter et remercier encore l'Union européenne d'avoir pris cette position pour la protection de cette espèce. Donc nous soutenons valablement. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Marley. And I don't see any requests on the floor from parties at all, and I'm interpreting that as a support. So that looks like, to me, the entire room is in support of this proposal. If any observers feel the need to speak, I can give them a brief opportunity. But if we can pass on that, I think, and I see no requests on the floor, thank you. So again, I conclude that this committee recommends by consensus that this proposal be adopted. So that concludes our discussion of proposal 36. And I'm now going to move on to where we finished this afternoon, If you give me a few seconds to get the right. So I think this afternoon we had concluded with proposal 24, and next on our list is proposal 25 for Batagur Kachuga, a transfer from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. The proponent was India, and I invite you, India, to introduce your proposal. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. India is pleased to introduce CoP19 Proposal 25 to transfer the red-crowned roof turtle Batagur Kachuga from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1 of the Convention of the COP for adoption. Chair, at the outset, we would like to express our concern about the global conservation status of all tortoises and freshwater turtles. Chelonians are the world's most endangered vertebrates, with half being categorized as vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered by the IUCN. These animals have life characteristics such as late maturity, longevity, which make them naturally susceptible to the risk of extinction. They are also faced with a range of anthropogenic threats due to habitat degradation and loss, invasive species, and collection and consumption, as well as pet trade. There are high levels of reported illegal and illegal trade of Chelonian species. We must, as a convention, do more to protect them, as it seems our concern is shared by other parties, as 12 of the 52 proposals which have been submitted to amend the appendices seek to provide better protection to tortoises and freshwater turtles. Batagur Kachuga is a large, shy, riverine turtle which was known only to inhabit the Gangetic Basin of India and Bangladesh. It has selective habitat requirements and slow recruitment, with a generation time estimated over 25 years. It is classified as critically endangered by the IUCN. It is now known that with certainty to exist only in the National Chambal Sanctuary of India and is considered to be extinct in Bangladesh. The species is threatened by illegal exploitation for consumption and international pet trade, particularly to East and to Southeast Asia. The males of the species are particularly targeted for the pet trade due to their brilliant coloration. It is also threatened by systemic impacts on its main river habitat, such as pollution, hydrological projects, and entanglement in fishing nets. Batagur Kachuga has suffered steep declines in its population. The population is inferred to have reduced by at least 80% in the past 50 years, and this decline is an ongoing declination. Batagur Kachuga is provided the highest degree of legal protection and is listed in Schedule 1 of India's Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Hunting and trade of species is therefore illegal in India. However, poaching and illegal trade of this protected turtle species is a major challenge in India, where seizures of thousands of specimens are reported every year. Species-level identification of seized specimens is also a challenge. Tortoises and freshwater turtles are targeted for international pet, meat, and callipee trade, as well as for illegal domestic consumption in some areas. Batagur Kachuga qualifies for listing on CITES Appendix 1, since it is or may be affected by trade and meets the biological criteria found in Resolution Conference 9.24, Ref CoP17, Annexure 1, specifically paragraph C, parenthesis 2I. Since the ongoing decline and the continued threats to the species population is expected to continue into the future, and any trade in the species will have a detrimental impact on its status. A CITES Appendix 1 listing would ensure that, number one, legal international trade in the species does not take place for commercial purposes. Number two, international trade in captive bred specimens only takes place from registered facilities. And number three, higher and more proportionate penalties are provided for illegal trade of the species. We want to draw the attention of the parties in IUCN and Traffic's analysis of COP19 proposals, both of which conclude that the species appears to meet the criteria for an Appendix 1 listing. We urge the parties to support our proposal to transfer Batagur Kachuga to Appendix 1 of the Convention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. And with that, I open the floor for comments by parties. And I see Costa Rica, followed by Mauritania.
Sí, muchas gracias, señor presidente. Costa Rica felicita a la India por la propuesta de inclusión en el apéndice 1, transferir del apéndice 2 al 1 a la tortuga de techo de corona roja. Es una población en peligro crítico, amenazas comerciales como animales de compañía, mascotas, carne, medicina tradicional, y cumple con los criterios de la transferencia del apéndice. Costa Rica apoya la propuesta e insta a las partes a apoyar la propuesta. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Costa Rica. I'll give the floor to Sri Lanka, followed by Senegal.
Thank you, Chair. Sri Lanka supports the proposal by India to list the red-crowned roofed turtle to Appendix 1. The justification is well presented by the proponent. Inclusion in CITES Appendix 1 would ensure the survival of this unique species. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sri Lanka. I think I said Senegal next, followed by the European Union.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Comme vous le savez, les tortues aquatiques sont menacées mondialement. Au Sénégal, la loi protège toutes les espèces de tortues marines. Et sous ce rapport, nous appuyons fermement cette proposition de l'Inde et nous demandons aux partis de soutenir cette proposition. Merci.
Thank you. Senegal, I give the floor to the European Union, followed by Mauritania.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. Protecting large turtle species which occur in densely populated areas is extremely challenging, and the EU and its member states thank India, the only remaining range state of Batagur-Kachuga, for proposing the uplisting of this species. We agree that it fulfills the listing criteria and that the inclusion in Appendix 1 will provide necessary trade restrictions. As CITES can only prevent international trade, it is important to supplement the listing with additional conservation efforts, which are already conducted by India in cooperation with the Madras Crocodile Bank Trust and the Turtle Surveillance Alliance. We hope that the head starting program, as well as the surveying and protection of nesting sites, will continue and allow the species to recover to a conservation status where it is not anymore threatened by extinction. The EU and its member states wish India and its efforts everything well and for this iconic species, and hope it will receive all required sponsorship for the full protection of the species. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. So I see Mauritania, followed by the United States.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie l'Inde pour avoir soumis cette proposition concernant le transfert de cette espèce de tortue de l'annexe 2 en annexe 1. Cela justifie vraiment les efforts du gouvernement indien à contribuer aux efforts vraiment de conservation de la biodiversité, et particulièrement pour cette espèce. Les informations partagées concernant les critères réellement sont remplies, et sur ça, la Mauritanie appuie fermement cette proposition. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mauritania. I give the floor to the United States, to be followed by the Seychelles and United Kingdom, and that concludes the list of parties.
Thank you, Chair. The United States supports this proposal because it meets the criteria for Appendix 1.
Thank you. United States, Seychelles, and United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. The Seychelles fully supports this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, the UK.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to India for submitting this proposal to add the red-crowned roof turtle, Batagur kachuga, to CITES Appendix 1. The UK notes that the species is classified as critically endangered by IUCN and appears to meet the biological criteria for listing on Appendix 1, following a marked population decline. It faces a high risk of extinction and is detrimentally affected by extrinsic factors, including habitat loss from pollution and hydrological projects, and overharvest for illegal consumption and the illegal international pet trade. Despite being legally protected from exploitation in India, enforcement may be insufficient to prevent ongoing illegal trade. Inclusion in Appendix 1 is expected to more effectively address illegal trade in this species. We are, however, concerned that this species and the species covered by Proposal 33 have been listed previously on Appendix 2, but this listing has not been sufficient to safeguard the species. We would therefore urge that all efforts are made to address the threats facing this species in order that in future we can be discussing a move from Appendix 1 to Appendix 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. United Kingdom, I'll give the opportunity for any observers who might want to make brief interventions, but it's clear there is overwhelming support in the room. Okay, I've only got one request. The German Society for Herpetology, if you can be extremely brief, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We are also providing overwhelming support for that proposal, as this species does, without any doubt, meet the criteria for an inclusion in Appendix 1. Additionally, we encourage India to support the international exchange of breeding stock specimens for controlled ex situ breeding programs and genetic research. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, the German Society for Herpetology, and with that, I conclude again that this committee recommends by consensus that Batagur kachuga be transferred from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. So that concludes discussion of that proposal number 25, and we move on to our next proposal, which is Proposal 26, Kuora galbinifrons, transfer from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1, proposed by the European Union and Vietnam. And I give the floor to one of the proponents to introduce us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Vietnam and the European Union propose to transfer the Indo-Chinese pork turtle Kuora galbinifrons from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1 in accordance with Article 2, Paragraph 1 of the Convention, with the following reason. 1. The genus Kuora, including Kuora galbinifrons, had been listed in CITES Appendix 2 since CoP19 in 2000. At CoP16 in 2013, the listing of Kuora galbinifrons were amended to include a zero quota for the wild specimen for commercial purposes. Based on the proposal that's sponsored by Vietnam, the two close related species include Kuora baureti and Kuora picturata were transferred to Appendix 1 at last CoP18 in order to better protect our native and threatened turtle from illegal trade. Number 2, Kuora galbinifrons is known in China, Laos, and Vietnam. Overall, the species were assessed as critically endangered in 2000. In recent assessment from 2020, scientists confirmed the species is critical conservation status. The available data indicate that the species experience a population decline over 90% with 60 years, which equals 3 generations, because of overcollection for the international pet trade and consumption. Besides the targeted collection, habitat loss and degradation are important threats to the species. In Vietnam, this species is protected under the high level according to the government decree. Number 3, as also noted in IUCN Red List assessment, our extensive field surveys in Vietnam during recent years indicate that species is extremely rare. Number 4, even though the collection of species from the wild is prohibited in all 3 range states, the species is still being identified in illegal trade. A transfer to Appendix 1 will more effectively arrest illegal and unsustainable trade and will, among others, lead to higher penalties in case of offenses in Vietnam. With current conservation status, population size, and the trend of population and the negative impact from the international trade, the Kiora Gambia leaf fronts totally meet criteria to uplift to Appendix 1 in accordance with Resolution number 9.24, CoP19, Annex 1, threatened with the extinction due to the small white population with high intensity of vulnerable and past and ongoing decline due to the exploitation. So Vietnam invites the member parties to support the proposal. We thank you very much for the EU and other member parties to support this proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vietnam, and I open the floor for comments by parties. And I see first Malaysia, followed by the Lao People's Democratic Republic.
Mr. Chair, this species has been categorized as critically endangered and has shown to be highly exploited. Malaysia supports this proposal by the EU and Vietnam to upgrade to Appendix 1. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Malaysia. I give the floor to Lao People's Democratic Republic, followed by India.
Thank you, Chair. Lao PDR also fully support the proposal by Vietnam and European Union. So we also encourage all parties to support this proposal, because this species is not only endemic to Lao PDR, but also in the Langston. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lao PDR. I give the floor to India, followed by Indonesia.
Thank you, Chair. India reiterates its concern for the conservation status of tortoises and freshwater turtles. These species have life characteristics which make them vulnerable to exploitation. Many are affected by habitat loss and degradation, and they are also heavily traded both legally and illegally. Many Asian species are in a particularly precarious position. The Indo-Chinese box turtle was assessed as critically endangered in 2000, and its status only appears to have declined in the last 2 decades. Collection for trade and consumption appear to be the primary threat to the species. The Indo-Chinese box turtle clearly meets the criteria for Appendix 1, and India strongly supports this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. I give the floor to, thank you, India. I give the floor now to Indonesia, followed by Senegal.
Thank you, Chair. Indonesia appreciates proponent countries in preparing the proposals. Indonesia, in line with the Secretariat comments, in that COP18, 2 other related species, Cora bauroti and Cora picturata, are adopted for uplisting Appendix 1. Concerning small-size population and illegal trade, a threat of Cora galbinifrons, Indonesia support conservation effort of this species for inclusion to Appendix 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Indonesia. I give the floor to Senegal, followed by the European Union.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. L'espèce tortue porte-boîte à front jaune a été classée par l'UICN en 2018 en danger critique d'extinction. L'effondrement estimé de la population de plus de 90% en 3 générations nous oblige à apporter notre soutien pour éviter l'extinction de cette espèce dans la nature. C'est pour cette raison que nous soutenons cette proposition. Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the European Union, then Cambodia.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. The EU, together with Vietnam, proposes to transfer the species Cora galbinifrons, the Indo-Chinese box turtle, from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. The species meets the biological criteria found in Annex 1 of Res Conf 924, Ref COP17, under criteria A5, as it has a small population in the wild with a high intrinsic vulnerability due to its slow growth and a low fecundity of a single clutch of 1 to 3 eggs produced annually. The species also meets criteria C1, as the population suffered an estimated 90% population decline over the past 60 years or 3 generations. As a direct result of overcollection for the international pet and Asian consumption trade, thus meeting the marked decline threshold of Annex 5 in Resolution 924 F COP17. As the similar and likewise threatened species Cora bureti and Cora picturata, which were transferred to Appendix 1 at COP18, Cora galbinifrons is considered as critically endangered by the IUCN Red List and is hunted with exceptional effort, which allow harvesting even the last specimens in severely depleted populations. The previously high trade in Cora galbinifrons collapsed as a result of the species' increasing rarity. Although it was once considered common, field encounters with Cora galbinifrons are now rare, and even during dedicated surveys, they can hardly be found. In addition to overcollection, habitat loss and degradation are additional threats to the species. While it is afforded fully legal protection in all 3 range states, and legal commercial exports of wild specimens have not been reported since 2013, market surveys indicate continued illegal trade, as pointed out by the representative of Vietnam. Through the periodic review process, the Animal Committee concluded that Cora galbinifrons meets the criteria for inclusion in Appendix 1, and therefore we invite all parties to support the proposal and transfer the species to Appendix 1 of the Convention. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. I'll give the floor to Cambodia, followed by the United States, and that concludes the list of parties.
And thank you, Chair. Cambodia is in line with the recommendation of the CITES Secretariat recommendation to adopt this proposal to transfer the Indo-Chinese box turtle from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1, and we support the proponent of the European Union and Vietnam. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Cambodia. United States.
Thank you, Chair. The U.S. intervenes in support of the Vietnam and EU's proposal to transfer the Indo-Chinese box turtle, Vietnamese box turtle, and flowerback turtle to Appendix 1.
Thank you, United States, and that concludes the list of parties. I don't know if any observers wish to speak. Of course, it seems again that we have come to a conclusion where the room. Our parties support this proposal. German Society for Herpetology, if extremely brief, you may have the floor, but very short, please. I want to move on to another proposal.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To make it extremely brief, we strongly recommend this proposal be adopted by parties, and we support that proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And so again, I conclude that this committee recommends by consensus that Quora galbinifrons is transferred from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. And that concludes our discussion. I think we have time to hopefully fit in one more proposal. So I will continue with Proposal 27 tonight and invite, this Proposal 27 for Rhinoclemis species to be included in Appendix 2 with the proponents Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Panama. So I invite one of you to introduce the proposal. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Sí, muchas gracias, señor presidente. Brasil, Colombia, Panamá y Costa Rica les presentamos a todos los países parte de la convención la propuesta para incluir a las tortugas neotropicales del género Rhinoclemis en el apéndice 2 en concordancia con los artículos de la convención. La propuesta el género Rhinoclemis contiene 9 especies de tortugas acuáticas y terrestres que se distribuyen en el continente americano en 15 países desde México hacia el sur por Centroamérica hasta Brasil y Ecuador. 5 especies de Rhinoclemis están clasificadas como casi amenazadas en la lista roja de las especies de la UICN. Varias especies están clasificadas como en peligro de extinción, amenazadas o vedadas en México, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Ecuador, Colombia y Venezuela. Las tortugas Rhinoclemis son especies de crecimiento lento con una baja tasa de reproducción. Algunas especies tardan hasta 12 a 14 años en alcanzar la madurez sexual. Ponen pocos huevos, de 1 a 6 por nidada. Están amenazadas por la destrucción de hábitat, deforestación, contaminación de zonas lacustres, recolección para el consumo, comercio de mascotas y sus conchas son usadas para las tiendas de curiosidades. La recolección de tortugas para el comercio internacional de mascotas y consumo es un problema grave que va en aumento. Las 9 especies de tortuga Rhinoclemis se encuentran en el comercio internacional de forma legal o ilegal. Las exportaciones de los países del área de distribución tienen como destino principal a los Estados Unidos de América, que a su vez exportan las tortugas principalmente para el mercado asiático. Rhinoclemis pulcherrima es la especie más exportada, seguida de punctularia, funérea y rúbida. Estados Unidos importó 67.927 ejemplares de Rhinoclemis entre el 2011 y el 2020. Importaron tortugas de Nicaragua, Guyana, El Salvador, Surinam, México, Panamá y Guatemala. A su vez, los Estados Unidos exportaron 6.348 ejemplares entre el 2016 y el 2020. El 97% de sus exportaciones fueron para países de Asia, principalmente para Hong Kong, China, Taiwán, Japón y Corea. El tráfico ilegal afecta a varias de las especies de Rhinoclemis. Por ejemplo, el número de aseguramiento de estas tortugas en México entre 1999 al 2021 tiene una tendencia hacia el alza. En Colombia, los decomisos aumentaron 22 veces entre el 2005 y el 2009. En Guatemala, Rhinoclemis aureolata se encuentra entre las 10 especies de reptiles más incautadas. En Ecuador, Rhinoclemis nasuta se pasa de contrabando a Perú, desde donde se exporta a Estados Unidos de América y a otros países. Las especies de Rhinoclemis son muy difíciles de identificar para los que no son expertos, como las autoridades de aduana. De hecho, el doctor Peter Paul Van Dyck, del Grupo de Identificación de Tortugas, vinculado a la red de identificación de tortugas de CITES, afirma: Rhinoclemis es uno de los géneros más difíciles de identificar después de Quinosternon, Pelucios y Mesoclemis. Y dice: Rhinoclemis es notablemente similar a algunos geomídeos asiáticos y desafiaría a cualquier estudioso de la fauna a diferenciar Rhinoclemis annulata de un Melanoclemis trijuga en el comercio sin una localización fiable. La propuesta para incluir a las 9 especies del género Rhinoclemis cumple con los criterios de CITES por estar amenazadas por el comercio internacional, el tráfico ilegal, así como por la dificultad de identificación. De hecho, 171 científicos expertos en tortugas de 50 países han enviado una carta a la Secretaría de CITES apoyando todas las propuestas de tortugas que se están viendo en esta conferencia de las partes. Además, los países de la región Latinoamérica, del Centro, Sudamérica y el Caribe apoyan esta propuesta. Exhortamos a todos los países parte de la CITES a apoyar la inclusión de las 9 especies del género Rhinoclemis en el apéndice 2 de la CITES. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Costa Rica, and I open the floor for comments. We have 15 minutes left this evening, so please keep your remarks very focused and to the point, please. I see Brazil, as a co-proponent, has requested the floor. I'll give you the floor, followed by Guatemala, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Como coproponentes, felicitamos a Colombia, Costa Rica y Panamá por presentar conjuntamente con Brasil la propuesta 27, que pretende incluir las especies del género Rhinoclemis en CITES apéndice 2. Es nuestra opinión que están presentes todos los criterios biológicos para su inclusión en el apéndice 2. Además, el comercio internacional de las especies incluidas en el género, algunas de las cuales se encuentran en Brasil, está aumentando considerablemente. Como medida de precaución, la propuesta es necesaria para garantizar una mejor regulación del comercio. Brasil, por lo tanto, invita a otras partes a apoyar esta propuesta. Gracias.
Thank you, Brazil. I give the floor to Guatemala, followed by the European Union.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Guatemala, como rango de distribución de 2 especies del género Rhinoclemis, Rhinoclemis arolata y Rhinoclemis pulquérrima, apoya y felicita la propuesta de inclusión de todo el género Rhinoclemis. Guatemala apoya la propuesta. Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Guatemala. I give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. We welcome the efforts by several range states to protect the native fauna. Likewise, we also assume the responsibility to carefully consider, based on the best available scientific data, whether the inclusion of the genus Rhinoclemis in Appendix 2 of CITES serves the conservation of these species. There is insufficient indication that international trade is currently negatively affecting wild population of any Rhinoclemis species. Most species are assumed to have relatively extensive ranges and were partly shown to be locally common. Those species with a more confined distribution do not appear in the international trade in conservation-relevant numbers. While most species are reported to be domestically used in large scales, known international trade is mainly in captive bred specimens and largely in Rhinoclemis pulcherrima manni. Therefore, we are not convinced that criterion 2A of Article 2 of Resolution Conf 924 Ref CoP19 is met for all Rhinoclemis species. As all 9 species within the genus Rhinoclemis can be distinguished from each other, criterion Annex 2b is not met. Consequently, we are inclined to not support this proposal in its current form, but we would be willing to support a reduced proposal. We encourage the proponents to restrict the proposal to Rhinoclemis areolata, diademata, rubida, pulcherrima, and punctularia only. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, European Union, and I'll come back to the proponents later for their reflections. If other parties, when I got 7 parties requesting the floor, 8 parties, 9 parties, 10. Please be very, very, very brief in your comments if we can try and conclude this evening. I give the floor to Senegal, then Ecuador.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Nous remercions le Brésil, le Costa Rica et le Panama pour cette proposition. Nous pensons que la tortue des bois néotropicales remplissent les caractères biologiques pour être classée dans les annexes 2 de la CITES. Je vous rappelle simplement que l'annexe 2 ne signifie pas une interdiction, c'est également la traçabilité, la durabilité et la légalité. Donc inscrire ces espèces dans l'annexe 2 de la CITES va renforcer un peu sa conservation pour des espèces qui sont menacées. Merci.
Thank you, Senegal. I give the floor to Ecuador, followed by Argentina.
Gracias, señor presidente. Seré breve con la intervención. Agradecemos a Costa Rica por presentar esta importante propuesta para la región. Ecuador, como área de distribución de 3 de las 9 especies del género Rhinoclemis, apoya la propuesta de inclusión en el apéndice 2.
Thank you, Ecuador. Argentina, followed by Uruguay.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Y en aras del tiempo, Argentina apoya esta propuesta.
I give the floor to Uruguay, followed by Colombia.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Uruguay también apoya esta propuesta. Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Colombia, followed by Guyana.
Gracias, señor presidente. Colombia, como uno de los países coproponentes, quiere agradecer a sus demás compañeros coproponentes, expresar que de las 9 especies, Colombia tiene 4 de estas en su distribución. Contamos con información sobre comercio y tráfico, lo que refleja una problemática creciente en este grupo, indicando también que hay un alto tráfico de tortugas entre las fronteras, por ejemplo, de Ecuador y Colombia. La información basada en las características intrínsecas de vulnerabilidad y los altos volúmenes de aprovechamiento y comercialización de las especies que han sido documentados hace evidente y necesario avanzar en su gestión y proponer aquí una inclusión en el apéndice 2. Gracias.
Thank you, Colombia. I give the floor to Guyana, followed by the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. Guyana would like to record that it does not support this proposal because the evidence as presented does not indicate that it meets criteria in Annex 2A, neither does it meet it in Annex 2B. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Guyana. I give the floor to United Kingdom, then Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. The UK wishes to thank the proponents of this proposal for submitting to include the genus Rhinoclemis in Appendix 2. We support the proposal made by the European Union to reduce the scope based on limited evidence that some species in the genus meet the criteria for listing on Appendix 2. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Switzerland, you have the floor, followed by Peru.
Thank you, Chair. I would line ourselves with the comments made by the European Union and just UK. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. Peru, you have the floor, followed by Togo.
Gracias, señor presidente. Apoyamos la propuesta de los proponentes.
I give the floor now to Togo, followed by Niger, Gabon, and Benin, and I'm closing the list now for tonight. So Togo, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bon, pour la réponse vite, nous dirons que nous soutenons cette proposition. Et nous invitons toutes les parties à soutenir la proposition de. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Togo. Niger, then Gabon.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président. Donc, nous félicitons les pays auteurs de cette proposition. Et permettez-nous de préciser que les tortues rhinoclémis sont des tortues aquatiques et terrestres qui ont un faible taux de reproduction avec 1 à 6 œufs par saison, et que le commerce international légal et illégal et international augmente plutôt la menace sur ces 9 espèces. Elles remplissent alors les critères d'inscription à l'annexe 2. Par conséquent, nous soutenons fortement cette proposition. Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. I give the floor to Gabon, then Benin.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Le Gabon souhaite féliciter les auteurs de cette proposition et reconnaît que les tortues de bois néotropicales sujets à cette proposition remplissent pleinement les critères d'inscription à l'annexe 2 et donc soutient cette proposition. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. And Benin, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le Bénin se joint à toutes les parties qui soutiennent la proposition. Merci.
Thank you. And there are no further requests for the floor. It's late. Colleagues, it's nearly 5 to 10. What I'm going to suggest is that we adjourn discussions of this proposal now, that we have heard from the European Union and the UK and Switzerland that they don't support the full proposal, but they might support one with a narrower focus. I'm going to suggest that the time between now and when we resume discussion of this proposal could be used for discussions between parties to see if there's some form of agreement on a way forward, noting the opposition and so on. So with that, I adjourn discussions of Proposal 27. Before I conclude for the night, I will give you an indication of my plans for tomorrow. It will be put on the schedule as soon as possible. I intend to begin tomorrow by returning to our agenda of Friday morning, last Friday. So I'll begin with item 11, 43.1, 43.2, 44.1, 44.2, 46, and 51. I will then, if there are any COM documents that we can address, I will seek to address those. I will also perhaps begin by dealing with some of the summary records, and then I will move on to continuing with amendment proposals. So that will be later in the morning or perhaps even the afternoon, depending on progress, before we come back to amendment proposals. So with that, I thank you all for your diligence and perseverance and sticking with this session until the end. I thank the interpreters also. So thank you very much. Any announcements? No, from the Secretariat. So thank you. Good night. See you tomorrow morning.